12 years old, that's when Singapore decides your future. Not gradually through years of accumulated achievement, not flexibly with room for late development or changing interests. At exactly 12 years old, every Singaporean child sits for the primary school leaving examination. The score you receive determines which secondary school you attend. That school determines your academic track. That track determines your university options. Those options determine your career trajectory. Your entire adult life, shaped by performance across 4 days when you're barely finished with childhood. This isn't about academic rigor, it's about what happens when a society optimizes education so completely for measurable outcomes that childhood itself becomes a sacrifice zone, when the pressure to succeed starts before children can spell the word pressure, when parents transform into project managers and children into investments that must deliver returns. But before we start, if you're interested in understanding how education systems really shape societies, subscribe now and share your thoughts in the comments. The primary school leaving examination, known universally by its acronym PSLE, dominates Singaporean childhood in ways that outsiders struggle to comprehend. The test itself seems straightforward: mathematics, science, English, mother tongue, 4 subjects, 4 papers. But this simplicity masks the examination's actual function. The PSLE doesn't measure what you know. It measures how you rank against every other 12-year-old in the country. It's designed for differentiation, not assessment. The goal isn't determining whether you've mastered material. It's sorting you into categories that will follow you for life. The scoring system reflects this sorting function with uncomfortable precision. Until recently, scores were reported as T-scores, a statistical measure that explicitly ranks students relative to each other. A score of 250 didn't mean you answered 250 questions correctly. It meant you performed better than a specific percentage of your cohort. The system was reformed in 2021 to achievement levels, ostensibly reducing stress, but the fundamental mechanism remained unchanged. Schools still admit based on rankings. Universities still select based on trajectories that trace back to PSLE results. The stress didn't decrease because the stakes didn't change, only the language used to describe them. This examination system didn't emerge accidentally. Singapore's founding generation designed it intentionally to identify and cultivate talent in a resource-poor nation. Academic achievement became the primary meritocratic sorting mechanism, more reliable than family background or personal connections. In theory, any child, regardless of origin, could excel through hard work and ability. The PSLE was meant to ensure fairness, to prevent advantage from accumulating across generations, to keep social mobility possible. These weren't malicious goals, they were genuine attempts to build a just society. But meritocracy doesn't mean what people think it means, especially when filtered through standardized testing at age 12. The tuition industry reveals what happens when high-stakes testing meets parental anxiety. Singapore spends over $1 billion annually on private tutoring, not university test prep, not specialized advanced instruction, primary school tutoring. Parents enroll children in tuition centers starting at age 7, sometimes earlier. The average primary school student attends between 4 and 6 hours of tuition weekly on top of regular school. This isn't remedial help for struggling students. Top performers attend tuition because not attending means falling behind peers who do. The logic is inescapable. If everyone else is getting extra help, choosing not to means choosing disadvantage. The tuition centers operate with industrial efficiency. Branded chains like Kuman, iLevel, and local competitors have standardized curricula designed to maximize test scores. They don't teach broader understanding or cultivate curiosity. They teach the PSLE. Pattern recognition for mathematics problem types, memorization techniques for science, essay templates for English composition, model answers for comprehension questions. The entire apparatus exists to game an examination that supposedly measures inherent ability and hard work. But when gameability becomes systematic, when advantage can be purchased, meritocracy transforms into something else entirely. The costs extend beyond money. A typical primary 6 student the year before PSLE maintains a schedule that would exhaust adults. School from 7:30 a.m. to 1 p.m., lunch, then tuition from 2 to 6 p.m., dinner, homework, practice papers until 10 or 11 p.m. Weekends bring more tuition, more practice exams, more preparation. 12-year-olds operate on sleep deficits, manage stress loads that manifest in physical symptoms, live with anxiety levels that meet clinical thresholds. This isn't happening to a small subset of students. It's the normative experience of Singaporean childhood. The parental investment reflects rational calculation within an irrational system. A good PSLE score provides access to top secondary schools. Those schools have established track records of university placement. University credentials determine starting salaries and career trajectories. The return on investment from tuition centers, measured across a lifetime of earnings, justifies almost any expenditure in the present. Parents who can afford $1,500 monthly per child for premium tuition make that investment without hesitation. It's not indulgence, it's necessary insurance against downward mobility in a system that sorts early and forgives late. But here's where the pressure compounds in ways the system's designers didn't anticipate. When the top 20% of students all receive extensive tuition, the benchmark for success shifts upward. Schools can't lower standards because universities haven't expanded proportionally. The ratio of qualified applicants to available spots means competition intensifies rather than stabilizes. More preparation becomes necessary not to get ahead, but to stay in place. The Red Queen's race applied to childhood, running faster and faster to remain in the same position. The school environment itself amplifies pressure through well-intentioned mechanisms. Teachers provide class rankings, schools publish honor rolls, parents compare openly, if not always explicitly. Children internalize these comparisons early. By primary 4, most students know exactly where they stand relative to peers. They know which classmates are smarter, which are struggling, which are competition. This awareness shapes self-conception in ways that persist. Your academic identity formed at 9 or 10 becomes your identity. The smart kid, the average student, the one who struggles. These categories feel permanent because the system treats them as predictive. The streaming system makes this categorical thinking structural. After PSLE, students sort into Express, normal academic, or normal technical streams. Express is the university preparation track. Normal academic leads to polytechnics and diplomas. Normal technical aims toward technical education and direct workforce entry. The system claims flexibility, promises that streams aren't destinies, but the statistics tell a different story. Less than 5% of students move between streams after initial placement. The track you're on at 13 is the track you stay on. The differentiation that was supposed to be about pacing and approach becomes permanent sorting. The psychological impact manifests in measurable ways. Singapore has among the highest youth anxiety rates globally. Student suicides, while still relatively rare, cluster around examination periods with statistical significance that's impossible to ignore. Help-seeking behaviors for stress and depression among adolescents have increased 40% in the past decade. School counseling services report overwhelming demand they cannot meet. These aren't coincidental trends, they're systematic outcomes of systematic pressure. The international comparisons Singapore celebrates also reveal what gets lost. Yes, Singaporean students top PISA rankings in mathematics and science. Yes, they outperform peers globally on standardized assessments. But the same studies show lower measures of enjoyment in learning, reduced intrinsic motivation, higher correlation between stress and achievement. Singapore produces students who excel at testable knowledge while reporting lower satisfaction with education itself. The system achieves its stated goals while undermining unstated ones like curiosity, creativity, joy in learning. The class dimensions deserve direct acknowledgement. Wealthy families don't just buy tuition, they buy optionality. Private schools, international curricula, overseas boarding schools, all these alternatives exist for those who can afford them. The PSLE matters most to middle-class families who need the public system to deliver mobility. But those same families face rising tuition costs, increasing competition, and diminishing returns on investment. The meritocratic promise that anyone can succeed through hard work runs into the reality that success increasingly requires resources not everyone has. The enrichment activities function as another axis of competition that advantages the already advantaged. Admission to top secondary schools considers not just PSLE scores but co-curricular activities, leadership positions, special achievements. Students need good grades and demonstrated excellence in sports, arts, or service. Families with means enroll children in elite swimming programs, Suzuki violin, robotics clubs, enrichment camps. These aren't hobbies, they're resume building. The child who spends afternoons in free play doesn't compete effectively with the child whose schedule is professionally managed. The parent-child relationship warps under this pressure in predictable ways. Conversations revolve around grades, rankings, examination performance. Love becomes conditional on achievement, or feels that way to children whose worth seems measured by scores. Parents who remember childhoods with unstructured playtime find themselves enforcing study schedules they know are excessive but feel they cannot avoid. The system makes everyone complicit. You either participate in the pressure or you accept that your child will likely fall behind those whose parents do. The teachers face their own impossible position. They see the stress damaging students, but they're measured by how those same students perform on examinations. A teacher who reduces homework, who emphasizes understanding over memorization, who prioritizes student well-being over test scores, that teacher faces pressure from parents, administrators, and the system itself. The incentives all point toward intensification. More practice, more assessment, more pressure. Teachers who entered the profession to inspire learning find themselves training test takers instead. The mother tongue requirement adds cultural dimensions to academic pressure. All students must take their ethnic group's language. Chinese students take Chinese, Malay students take Malay, Indian students typically take Tamil. This policy aims to preserve cultural heritage, to prevent complete Anglicization. But for many students, especially those from English-speaking households, mother tongue becomes the subject that determines PSLE results. You can excel in mathematics, science, and English, but if mother tongue brings down your aggregate, your options narrow. The policy creates situations where cultural preservation through language becomes an academic obstacle course. The long-term outcomes reveal the system's deepest costs. Singapore produces technically competent graduates who excel in structured environments. It struggles to produce risk-takers, creative thinkers, entrepreneurs who challenge conventions. The startup ecosystem, despite government support, remains small relative to comparable economies. Innovation metrics lag behind education rankings. This isn't coincidence. When you spend childhood learning that success means following instructions precisely, that creativity is risky and deviation is punished, those lessons persist. The system optimizes for compliance, not innovation. The generational question grows more acute as Singaporeans who experience this system raise their own children. Many parents explicitly want different childhoods for their kids. They remember the stress, the lost opportunities for play and exploration, the way childhood felt like continuous preparation for tests rather than a developmental stage with intrinsic value. But wanting different outcomes doesn't mean having power to create them. The system remains structured as it is. Opting out means accepting that your child will likely attend lower-tier schools, have fewer opportunities, earn less over their lifetime. That's not a choice most parents feel they can make. The comparison to other Asian education systems is instructive. South Korea and Japan have similar high-pressure examination cultures, but they've also witnessed social pushback, reform movements, public acknowledgement that the costs might exceed the benefits. Singapore's discourse remains more constrained. Criticism of education policy must be carefully framed, lest it seem like criticism of meritocracy itself, which cuts too close to governing party legitimacy. The conversation happens in private, among parents who share concerns but rarely advocate publicly for change. The reforms that do occur tend toward optimization rather than transformation, reducing the PSLE weightage slightly, expanding co-curricular considerations, introducing alternative pathways. These adjust the system's operation without questioning its fundamental structure. The assumption remains that sorting students early, maintaining competitive pressure, using standardized assessments as primary evaluation mechanisms, all this is necessary and appropriate. The question isn't whether this model serves children well, but how to manage its worst effects while preserving its core functions. The neurological research on adolescent development suggests the system's fundamental premise may be flawed. 12-year-old brains are nowhere near fully developed. Executive function, long-term planning, impulse control, all the capacities that enable students to manage the pressure they're under, those mature throughout adolescence into early adulthood. Sorting students permanently based on performance when their cognitive capacities are still forming makes questionable developmental sense. But acknowledging this would require restructuring institutions built around early differentiation. The mental health infrastructure cannot meet the demand the system creates, School counselors manage caseloads far beyond recommended ratios. Wait times for adolescent psychiatric services stretch months. Parents who recognize their children need help often cannot access it in timeframes that matter. The system produces psychological casualties at rates that exceed society's capacity to provide care. This isn't a temporary mismatch, it's structural. As long as the pressure remains this intense, the demand for mental health support will exceed supply. What would genuine reform look like? Delaying high-stakes examinations until students are developmentally better equipped to handle them. Expanding university slots to reduce competition intensity. Funding public schools adequately so private tuition isn't necessary for competitiveness. Measuring schools and teachers on student well-being alongside academic achievement, creating multiple pathways to success so PSLE results don't function as life sentences. None of this is impossible, but all of it requires admitting that the current system's costs may exceed its benefits. The government's response to criticism tends toward measurement rather than change. Studying the issue, collecting data, monitoring trends, all this happens continuously, but the policy adjustments that emerge don't fundamentally alter the experience of students and families. The pressure remains because the competition remains, because the scarcity remains. You cannot reduce anxiety about university admission without expanding university capacity or creating alternative pathways that society values equivalently. Neither has happened at scale. The question for parents becomes less about whether the system is good and more about how to help children survive it. Building resilience, maintaining perspective, ensuring kids know their worth isn't determined by scores. These become parental responsibilities. But it's asking a lot to expect 12-year-olds to maintain healthy perspective when every authority figure in their lives treats PSLE results as determining their futures. The cognitive dissonance of telling children that scores don't define them while simultaneously structuring their entire lives around score optimization is not lost on the children themselves. Singapore's education system delivers the outcomes it's designed to deliver: high test scores, international rankings, technical competence, workforce readiness. If those are your metrics, it's extraordinarily successful. But if you expand the frame to include childhood well-being, long-term psychological health, creativity, joy, the capacity for risk-taking and innovation, the picture changes dramatically. The system optimizes for measurable academic outcomes by sacrificing less quantifiable goods that matter enormously. The children moving through this system know something's wrong. They might not have language to articulate it clearly, but they feel it. The exhaustion that starts at 10 and never quite lifts. The anxiety that accompanies every examination, every ranking, every comparison. The sense that childhood is something happening to other people in other places, while they're trapped in continuous preparation for a future that never quite arrives because there's always another test, another benchmark, another threshold to clear. This is the cost of perfection. Singapore built an education system that reliably produces high-achieving students. It did this by making childhood itself an instrument of national economic strategy by transforming 12-year-olds into data points in international rankings, by accepting that the psychological well-being of an entire generation is an acceptable price for maintaining competitive advantage. The system works. The question is whether what it produces is worth what it destroys.